morning, everyone. It's an honor to welcome you to the first of a series of 4 webinars that we will be carrying out on behalf of the Economic Studies Department of FUSADES on the importance of innovation and technology for the increase of productivity of the growth and progress in the Central American region. We thank the support of the International Center for Private Enterprise, CIPE, under the think tank project that seeks to consolidate integration in Central America through think tanks. First of all, we thank Patrick Kilbride, an expert in public policies and former senior president of the Center for Innovation Policies, a global center of the Chamber of Commerce of the United States. I also thank Danilo Rodriguez Villamil with a long-standing experience in IP law and one of the key figures on IP law in El Salvador. I also want to thank Pedro Argumeo, who's a senior investigator of FUSADES, for sharing his time and knowledge in patents. I want to thank all 3 of them and the importance for innovation in the Central American region. We hope to have all of you with us for the next webinars in the next months, and we hope that today can be an enriching experience for all of you and for the growth in the region. I will give the mic to Morgan King, who's a project manager of CIPE for Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you, Alvaro. Good morning, everyone, and it is a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar today. My name, as Alvaro mentioned, is Morgan King, and I'm head of programs in CIPE, or CIPE in Spanish. Before we start, I really want to thank our co-organizer, FUSADES, because their leadership in innovation and development in the region of Central America is really inspiring. And honestly, it's a privilege to work with them on this initiative and just every day with you. What we'll explore today in this webinar is patents and IP. This connects directly with the mission of CIPE. We believe that even though global trade has generated, we still have significant challenges. There's unequal access to opportunities. There's a lack of inclusion in the value chains and the global value chains, and also limitations for people to be able to prosper. In CIPE, we work to cover these challenges through programs that support the business community, that promote transparency, and that encourage a business environment that is good for business. We think that innovation and IP, the respect to IP, can be a catalyzer, powerful catalyzer to close the gaps and generate prosperity that is more inclusive. Today with our experts, Patrick and Danilo, we will explore how patents can not only encourage creativity and competitiveness, but also how they can build bridges towards a more inclusive and fair future. I won't take any more time. Thank you very much for your attention. Welcome, everyone, and please take advantage of the space to learn and hear from the experts. I will give Patrick the mic. Patrick.
Over to you. I'll get your presentation started. Muchas gracias, Morgan, y gracias a todos, pero especialmente CIPE y FUSADES por invitarme. Good morning. My name is Patrick Kilbride. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning, and I apologize that I'm unable to deliver this discussion in Spanish, but I really enjoy being here with you today. For most of my career, I've been focused on trade in the Western Hemisphere, intellectual property and innovation. And so it's a special pleasure to be working with CIPE and FUSADES this morning. I have great admiration for the country and people of El Salvador, and our partnership together between El Salvador and the United States. I'm going to speak this morning about innovation and creativity and how it's rooted in intellectual property rights. And I'll also speak a little bit about the broader political environment, both in the United States and globally, which influences the ability of entrepreneurs to invest themselves in the creation of intellectual property. So sort of starting from the very beginning, when we think about innovation and creativity, by definition, we're talking about doing things that are inherently new, that have not been done before. And this, comes straight from the dictionary definitions of innovation and creativity: created rather than imitated, new, novel. And you'll see these throughout intellectual property law around the world, these themes reflected. So moving on, Morgan. So thanks. So I'm going to talk about, and I'll give you a brief outline here, sort of starting with the continuum of knowledge and technology, how that's reflected in intangible assets and intellectual property rights, and then getting into intellectual property ownership, how that allows entrepreneurs to manage risk, how then the assets that are created through intellectual property are financed, how they're exchanged in commercial transactions, how they enable startups to gain financing and cross what's been called the valley of death. And we're going to talk about research and development, how that feeds into an innovation ecosystem and an innovation life cycle. And then thinking about how technology standards are developed, which often bring together a whole host of stakeholders in a collaborative process to create a new technology standard, how those standards and the products that they relate to are commercialized, and importantly, how we facilitate technology transfer, which is the exchange of know-how and new technologies and the new products and services related to those technologies between one entity and another. So jumping right in, the next slide looks at this continuum of knowledge and technology. And when you think about this continuum, I want you to think in terms of the state of the art at the center of everything. And the state of the art is sort of the aggregate of everything that we know and everything that we've accomplished as a human society. And there's a process that affects the state of the art, and that is knowledge diffusion in the form of education. So, when all of us go to school, we are taught knowledge and skills that have been developed before us that collectively form the body of human knowledge. And then when we think of knowledge advancement, we think about research and experimentation of the type that advances what we know. And so that leads to new frontiers in the state of the art, because we're pushing forward what we know and what we're able to do through technology to advance the state of the art. When breakthroughs happen in the application of that knowledge to real world problems, we see technological advancement. And when the author or inventor of those breakthroughs is able to share what they've done with others, including through intellectual property rights, and we could talk more in a moment about disclosure in the patent system, then you have technology transfer. I'll come back to technology transfer later, but I think it's a really critical topic for this conversation, but moving ahead for now. Okay, so when we think about knowledge creation and intangible assets, our goal should be to create public policies that support the creation of assets in the exchange of those assets and of course, their commercialization, their application to productive uses. So assets are any resource that holds economic value, and intangible assets are a subset that are able to hold value yet lack physical characteristics. So for instance, as a business owner, when you train your workforce, that is an investment in an intangible asset. When you go to school, you're creating a personal intangible asset in the form of your education, and a college degree is even a formal certification of your achievement that enables you to extract the value that you've invested into that asset. So going forward, and when we think about intellectual property rights, you can think about a subset of this broader class of intangible assets that are eligible for legal protection as private property rights. And currently, in the United States and around the world, there's basically 4 forms of intellectual property rights that are eligible for that protection. We have patents for inventions and discoveries. Think of the new and better mousetrap, or the breakthrough discovery that leads to a cure for a particular type of cancer. We have copyrights for a wide range of creative works, books, movies, music, all sorts of forms of information and entertainment media. We have trademark protection for brand names, marks, and logos. And we have trade secret protection that is afforded to proprietary information and knowledge that's specific to an individual or company, and that they have taken specific steps to protect under the law. And each of these forms of intellectual property rights has some specific characteristics, and they have different terms. For instance, the patent term of a patent under agreements by the World Trade Organization in the WTO TRIPS agreement is a 20-year term of protection. Copyright terms tend to vary from country to country. Trademark terms in the United States, it's 10 years, but on an indefinitely renewable basis, as long as that name or mark is in use. And so you see these different forms of intangible assets protected through these various forms of intellectual property rights. And in fact, there are many more forms of intangible assets that are not protected and maybe should be. And we can think about that as a goal for policymakers. But moving on to the next slide for now. What is it that intellectual property rights can do? Well, one of the most fundamental things is that they help to overcome the risk that is associated with doing something inherently new. And when we think about risk in the business environment, all businesses and all entrepreneurs face and accept that there is risk, that consumer tastes will change, that economic cycles will go on, and there may be downturns in the market. There's a whole host of factors that impact your ability to succeed as an entrepreneur, but that's simply part of doing business. Now, when you're an innovator or a creator, you face an additional layer of risk that I'll call technical risk from doing something inherently new and untested. And when you're doing that, you often find very high rates of failure. For instance, in the life sciences industries, we find that 9 out of 10 new medicines that enter clinical trials may never make it to market, never provide a return on investment to the investor. So there is a heightened layer of risk associated with innovation and creativity. A third layer is what we can call political risk, and this is the possibility, and in some cases, unfortunately, the probability that policymakers will change the rules. And especially when you're looking at a long time frame, a long time horizon in terms of an investment in a new breakthrough technology, or even something like a feature film that may take several years to develop, a change in the rules along the road can be devastating to your investment. And so one of our, as advocates for innovation and creativity and intellectual property rights, one of our main goals is to build stability into the political and legal system so there's not a lot of changes. We want to build in transparency, predictability, and reliability so that investors can look out over a long time horizon and say, we can make these large cash investments in attempting to do something new with the knowledge that if we succeed, we'll be able to gain a return on investment because we have a reliable private property right, whether it's in a patent or a copyright, a trademark or a trade secret. So moving ahead. Okay, so in terms of IP ownership and investment at risk, and I apologize, I'm going to speak a little bit from my parochial US perspective here because that's what I know best. But when we think about IP ownership, our goal is to let you own your work. I mean, I think it's as simple as that. When you think about physical, tangible assets, if I go out and build a house or you manufacture a car in your factory, those involve physical labor with physical, tangible, visible outputs. But when you sit down at a computer and write a book, or you create new software, or you prepare a training manual for your workforce, those results are not tangible. They're not visible. They're intangible assets, but the labor that you've put in is no less valuable. In many cases, it's more valuable, and it's no less labor intensive. So one of the fundamental goals of intellectual property rights is to make sure that you own the results, the outputs of your mental labors just as much as you would expect to own the outputs of your physical labors. And when we do that through intellectual property rights, then we enable a return on investment. It means that whether as individuals or businesses, that we're able to invest time and money that would otherwise have to go to other projects that were either less risky or had outputs that were, in fact, protected by law. So when we have effective IP rights, when they're transparent, predictable, reliable, then you create a reliable basis for investment and innovation, and you enable the mobilization of capital at scale that's required to realize breakthrough technologies. And so, what that means is investment capital, bank loans, even funding from family and friends that would otherwise be unavailable suddenly becomes available because we have a legal environment that protects the outputs of your mental labors. And unlike physical labors, however, the tradition, and this is reflected in the US Constitution, is that those rights are only available for limited times. So for instance, that 20-year term for patent protection. And why is that? It's because, frankly, there's just such an enormous benefit to society from making sure that we disseminate knowledge. Going back to that continuum of knowledge that we talked about, we want to add to the common pool of knowledge and skills that we all have as a human race to be able to enjoy the realization of that. And I'll come back to this theme in a few minutes in terms of talking about rival versus non-rival goods. But when we limit the time, then we give the entrepreneur the ability to make a return on investment without denying society the benefit of this new knowledge. So moving forward. Okay, so non-rival goods. When we talk about intangible assets, including intellectual property rights, we're talking about something that, because of its intangible nature, can be used by a lot of different people at the same time. A great example is software. We're using Zoom here today to have this conversation, and probably tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of other people are doing the same thing at the same time. They're using this Zoom platform. Their use of it does not in any way lessen the value of this platform to us. So that's what economists call a non-rival good. By contrast, a rival good is one that can only be used by one person in one place at one time. Your car is a rival good. If somebody else is using your car, then you can't use it at the same time. So that's why we have this this limited time period is to enable the benefits of non-rival goods to be able to use it everywhere at the same time are realized without reducing the economic value to the creator, which if that value is not available, we might never see the new product or technology in the first place. So, moving along. So when and this is, I think, the really important part for we're getting into the critical piece for the business community. When we think about the business of innovation, we realize that all economic activity comes in the form of transactions. It's, us doing business together. You have something to sell. I have an interest in buying it. We, negotiate the price, I look at the price and make a decision of whether that's reasonable or not, and we can do a transaction. The same thing happens with intangible assets, but it just as in with their physical counterparts, it relies on the reliability of intellectual property rights to be able to do transactions. So we should think about a couple of things here. We should think about how innovations advance through a life cycle, because it's, I think, rarely a single business or individual that unilaterally accomplishes a breakthrough technology. Instead, what you see is businesses acquiring the rights to new ideas from universities, from research laboratories, from startups, and then taking them forward. And there, what you see is a life cycle and an ecosystem that develops. Collaboration along this ecosystem is critical to advancing a raw idea through product development and testing to a product or service that can actually serve consumers in the marketplace. So let's keep moving ahead. And so, when we think about innovation as a process, then we realize that it's rarely confined to a single aha moment. Now, aha moments are incredibly important. And you think about, of course, I think it was Euripides, right, who got in the bathtub and realized that he could measure the volume of water by how much was displaced when he got in. Similarly, we think of Einstein and his theory of relativity as aha moments. But Einstein's theory by itself is not of tremendous value to most people unless it can be applied. And so when we think about innovation as a process, we realize that Einstein built on many, many scholars, physicists who went before him. And after Einstein, many more came along and learned to apply his breakthrough to real world products and technologies. So moving ahead. And when we think about that, then we can understand how the innovation life cycle works. Taking these sort of breakthroughs in the research lab or on a chalkboard, taking that idea, investing in it, applying it through research and creative experimentation, testing new manufacturing processes in some case, and then delivering it to the end user. And moving to the next slide, more often than not, this is not a vertically integrated process. That is, there's not one single person or company doing this whole thing. Instead, it's the product of an innovation ecosystem, an interconnected network of stakeholders. They may be in government, they may be in universities, they may be in industries, they may be in the financial markets, but working together to advance a new product or technology through this innovation lifecycle. Moving forward. So, let's think about who, the stakeholders are. And I'll speak again a little bit parochially from my US experience, but we see in the United States that governments frequently serve as the early stage funder of scientific research. So, and that's important from, a national perspective when we think about competitiveness, when we think about technological leadership, when we think about national security. Government has a clear interest in directing the efforts of universities and the private sector along paths that serve political goals. So, that may be a stronger military, for instance. It may be a more sustainable, sources of energy. But governments fund the early stage scientific research and are able to point those energies in the directions they want. Meanwhile, universities, who are often the recipients of those funds, have a more open-ended forum for scientific inquiry. They're aggregating scholars and scientists whose basic role is to advance that pool of knowledge that we discussed, not only to share what we already know, but to figure out what else we can discover. Startups, the startup community often emerges from that university environment where a researcher or scientist may go out on their own to establish proof of concept. And in fact, they'll usually license the IP rights to those discoveries from the university that they worked for, funded by venture capital, equity markets, and other forms of IP financing. And I'll ask Morgan to share in the chat a link to a World Intellectual Property Organization report that came out just this morning. It's the first ever WIPO IP finance guide. And I think this is a really important topic for policymakers in the Salvadoran government, thought leaders like Fusades, and of course entrepreneurs to think about when you're thinking about intellectual property in El Salvador is how can we ensure that our entrepreneurs, our innovators have access to finance, because that really is the critical thing for all of this process that we're describing. And of course, big business. Big business is often stigmatized in the United States, but these are the companies that have the wherewithal, the bandwidth to invest at scale, that is in huge numbers, huge dollars, to make sure that you can turn a promising new technology into an actual product that can actually serve a consumer. So moving ahead. And this is just sort of a visual of that innovation ecosystem and life cycle. And so you can imagine at the bottom of your screen, you have funds flowing into this ecosystem, whether it's from government grants, government research grants, or business investments, and working its way through the life cycle from bottom to top, from early stage scientific research to applied science, product development, testing, in some industries, regulatory approvals to prove that your new product is safe and effective for what it's intended to do, and then figuring out the standard setting process, if necessary, how to manufacture something at scale, because just because you have a great product doesn't mean that it will be economical to make 10,000 or 1 million of them to actually reach your customer base. And that whole process results in commercialization or the realization of that new product and technology. And so you can imagine, as you're working new ideas through this life cycle and ecosystem, all of the exchanges that have to take place and that rely on intellectual property rights as the basis for negotiation and collaboration, because you and I can't do business together unless you understand the value that I'm bringing to the table and I understand the value that you're bringing to the table, and we know that that value is reliable, that it won't be changed by infringement by outsiders, or governments won't change the rules on us as we're making big investments to move forward. So going on. All right. Research and development is kind of, I'll go through this piece quickly. R&D is fundamental, and you can think of the same thing in both science and technology on the one hand and creative arts on the other. All of us invest in developing our own knowledge, developing our own skills, and then if we're an innovator or creator, trying new things. So expanding that basic human understanding and then applying it to specific problems like food production, like sustainable energy, like new artificial intelligence products, whatever it may be. But there are stages of R&D, and if we keep going, Morgan, we'll see that the sources for financing this R&D come from a lot of different levels. And we talked a bit about this: the federal government role at early stages, the university role in aggregating and hosting a wide range of researchers and their capabilities, the role of financial markets, and again, many ways to get at this, but a really important piece for all governments to figure out, and how we mobilize capital at scale to enable our products to eventually reach end users. Moving forward. In the United States, I think this is illustrative, although it is specific to the U.S. experience. What we see is that while the federal government is the biggest funder of basic research, when it comes to applied research and product development, the private sector really provides the lion's share of all funding. And when you look especially at the pie chart on the right at total research and development spending, you can see that the private sector investment really dwarfs that by all other stakeholders, including the federal government. And that just simply speaks to the importance of intellectual property rights, because while governments can make political decisions to spend money on research and development, businesses have to make commercially valid decisions. They are slaves to the bottom line, and they cannot make investments that don't offer a return, or they simply won't be in business any longer, and we certainly won't have the innovation and creative products that we want as a result of these processes. So again, moving forward. All right, and then when we think about the specific role of startups in this process, what is the importance of IP there? So first of all, it's the protection it provides against the unfair use of their work. Second is that it enables them to access financing. And third is it enables them to collaborate with others. It enables you, again, to come to the table and do deals. So moving on. All right, and then I just want to spend a second here thinking, as we think through this life cycle in terms of technology standards, when we think about the really breakthrough innovations and how they transform the way that we live and work and do business, of course, we have to think about technology standards. If we didn't have computers and software and telecommunications capabilities, for instance, that were compatible, we would not be able to have conversations like these. And so you see standards developers come together with stakeholders, with creators, with end users, all agreeing on what should go into a standard so that it is interoperable and functional. And then you necessarily have inventors who contribute to the development of the new standard, who are actually the root of the breakthroughs that are involved in the standard. And those inventors naturally have patent rights to their inventions. Moving forward. So, when we keep going, Morgan. So when we think about how the U.S.'s approach standard is really given deference to industry-led processes, recognizing that the inventive energy is coming from the U.S. private sector, and industry is supported in those roles by federal government agencies. Moving along. This is not necessarily the case in a lot of other countries where the government, and I'm thinking specifically of China here, but also other countries where the governments take a much more hands-on role in standards development. And that raises questions of industrial policy and competitiveness that the U.S. and other sort of more market-oriented markets have to grapple with. But as an advocate for intellectual property creators, my focus here has been on making sure that standard essential patents continue to be protected in those processes. And that's, because simply our technology innovators are making long-term strategic investments, big capital-intensive investments. They're relying on the patents that are granted by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, as well as patent offices around the world. The enforceability of those patents is what enables them to share their technology and be part of those standard-setting processes. And then when those inventions are included in a new standard, then they're referred to as a standard essential patent. That is, the standard would not work without this particular invention or technology. And in return for being included as part of the standard, which does have some commercial benefits because it helps them reach a wider market, the innovator agrees to make IP licenses available to standard adopters on what's called a fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory basis, which is a concept that is fraught with ambiguity and disagreement, but is an important one. Moving forward. So all of this leads up to what's usually called commercialization. I prefer to think of it as the realization of innovation, and it involves translating ideas into applications. Figuring out how a new idea can be used. It involves developing a product and testing it. In many cases, standard setting involved. And it's only at the end, but it's no small part of the process when businesses figure out how to create their product or service at scale and deliver it to end users, which often is an innovative process in itself. Going forward. And we'll stop here. Technology transfer. There's a lot of political weight attached to technology transfer today. We can think in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, when several private sector companies, sometimes with the help of government, developed brand new technologies to create vaccines for COVID-19. And there was immediately an uproar suggesting that technology should be transferred to countries around the world so that they could make the same products in their domestic market. That's a challenging idea, because while we can agree, I think, right from the outset, that technology transfer is a social and economic good. It is the end goal, one of the end goals of that continuum of knowledge that we talked about, but that it only happens effectively when intellectual property rights enable the inventor or creator to have some degree of control over how the technology is shared. And frankly, it's a little bit simplistic to think that in many cases that we would be able to share in whole cloth a new technology, which is made up of so many diverse sets of know-how and capabilities that all come together, in a company that maybe has been around, in case of Pfizer, for well over 100 years, but really relies on an intangible sort of capability within the company. What we see, though, on the other hand, is that when intellectual property rights are well protected, when they're transparent, predictable, and reliable, that technology transfer actually takes place continually and organically throughout that innovation ecosystem, that we see these various stakeholders coming together, doing business, sharing legal rights, sharing know-how, and that this is essentially how technology transfer happens. It's how new products and new technologies get to the rest of the world. And it's important that we protect the market mechanisms that allow that technology transfer to take place. So I've probably gone over considerably, Morgan. So why don't I pause there? I'd be happy to talk about the political environment a little more, but maybe we could do that in Q&A.
For me,
como les decía,
it's
es
important
importante
to
contextualizar
put
un poco lo
things
que está
into
pasando en El
context, what's
Salvador
happening in
con
El
respecto a
Salvador with regards to all these
estos cambios,
changes,
llamémosle
innovation and
exponenciales, como decía,
technology
que se están
that's
dando
happening
realmente de una forma
in a
muy
very
acelerada.
accelerated way.
Solo
And
voy a
I will
tratar de
try to
resumir
summarize very
muy
briefly
brevemente lo que está
what's
pasando en El
happening in
Salvador
El
desde el punto
Salvador
de
from the
vista
legal
legal
point of
para
view,
después
so
quedarme
that later
conversando con ustedes un poco sobre el tema
we
de
can talk about
del
the
seminario,
seminar,
que son las oportunidades y retos
opportunities
que
and
tenemos
challenges that we
frente a
have.
estos avances. Y en
And
definitiva,
finally,
decirles que la
the
nueva
new
ley, la
law
nueva
or
normativa
the
de
new
protección
IP
digital,
laws,
lo que viene a hacer y que va a estar
what
en
they
vigencia
do and what they will
en
do in
febrero del
February
2025,
2025
viene a recopilar todas
compiles all the
normativa que
norms that
estaba,
were,
llamémosle,
let's say,
diseminada
disseminated in
en
El
El Salvador
Salvador
desde
from
años
years
atrás.
back,
La ley de marcas,
trademark
por un lado,
law
la ley de propiedad
and
intelectual, por
IP
otro lado, que
law
regulaba
that
derechos de
regulated
autor y patentes, que eran
patents.
dos
And
áreas
these were two areas that were
disímiles, pero
different, but
que
that
estaban
were
en
in
un
the
cuerpo
same
normativo por temas históricos. Entonces,
body,
la ley de
just
propiedad
for historical
intelectual
reasons. The IP law
que va a entrar en vigencia
that
en
the
El
new that
Salvador
will be enacted now in El
es un
Salvador is a
código
code
de
of
toda la
all of the
normativa, lo
norms,
cual de cualquier
which
forma es beneficioso
is
para temas de
beneficial
referencias, para temas
for the
académicos,
academia, for
para los temas
reference,
de
for
la
the
misma
same
aplicación
application
de
of the
las
norms.
normativas. Entonces,
So I
quiero
want to
empezar
start
por uno de los
with one of the
aspectos más
most important
importantes
aspects in the law, which is the creation of the Salvadorian Institute of Intellectual Property. And this institute, that in some way is the equivalent of what is now the IP registry, what it will have is it will have some faculties besides the one it has other attributions such as share the knowledge of all of these IP rights that are important, cooperation agreements, and all the resources that have to do with the day-to-day for the particulars that we register in the National Center. So this institute will oversee many things, but it will focus mainly on the relevant changes that the norm entails. And these are 4 different areas: trademarks, patents, copyright. It talks a little bit about the digital and also competition and the norms for compliance of the norm. So since we cannot emphasize or talk so much about the changes that are coming, we can talk about a few, such as trademark. Trademark, and always connecting them into new technologies and the changes that are coming. Now, the 3D brands are being, or trademarks, are being included. So, with the new brands, such as brands that you can smell or taste, some were in the past norm, now they are finally being regulated. And of course, also the patents, like the industrial models, and these have also had they have broadened an IP, video games, and there's other norms in the digital area that have to do with domain names or web pages that the past legislation did not include. So the relevant changes, were the most significant changes, and to focus also in this talk, in this seminar, it's very important to mention that in patents we have moved forward a lot in something that is important, that is the concept of industrial design. The industrial design concept we could see before, even though it was in an IP law, it was closer to trademarks than patents. Now we know that it is a patent, and we are increasing the protection to drawings and models and interfaces, So this adapts a lot to the international norm that talks about these things, because the industrial drawings or models are rights in a certain way that normally the national entrepreneurs have closer access to. And the models are those that have more presentation in our country. And to be specific, industrial design is any combination of lines or figures that are given to a product for just because they look good, or these reforms can also be
tecnológicas o muy tecnológicas o simplemente de artesanía y que le da un aspecto
that
peculiar.
gives it a peculiar
Eso
aspect.
muy
That's the
similar
industrial
no se
design that was not
específicamente
regulated
en
in the
la normativa.
norms.
El
The
modelo
industrial model,
sí,
yes,
¿verdad? Que
is
la
the
forma tridimensional de cualquier
3D
producto,
form of any
que es
product.
básicamente
That
el
is
que
what
estaba
basically
antes.
we had
Y
before,
las
and the
interfaces
graphic
gráficas, que
interface,
es
that is how
cómo
do
los
the
usuarios
users, or
pueden
how can the users
interactuar
interact
con un dispositivo digital, como
digitally?
nosotros
How
vemos
do we see
las
the
interfaces
graphic
gráficas en nuestros
interface in our
dispositivos.
devices?
Eso no está en la
That was
normativa
not
anterior.
present in the
Y
past
es,
norms.
en
And in
El Salvador,
Salvador,
como ya voy a hablar un poco más
like I will say a
adelante,
bit
es una de
further
las
on, it's
cosas
one
que
of the things
durante la
that during
pandemia creció
COVID grew a
muchísimo, el
lot.
tema de emprendimientos
Digital
digitales,
entrepreneurs,
venta en
online
línea,
stores, and
y
these
son aspectos
aspects
muy
are very
valiosos que tenemos en
valuable
cuenta en
in
esta
these
nueva
new
normativa
norms
para el
for the
entorno nacional.
New
Eh,
law.
Lo que les
What I
decía,
was saying
definitivamente
is that
hay
definitely there are
cambios.
changes.
Por ejemplo, se amplía el plazo de protección a 15 años
The
de la protección
design
industrial.
protection
Para
is
cualquier
term
tipo
goes
de
up to
dibujo,
15
modelo,
years.
interfaz
Any
gráfica
type of drawing
van a tener
will be
15 años de
protected for
protección
15 years. That will be the
y
term.
se deben pagar
And
derechos quinquenales
they
para
have to,
mantenerlos
you have to
vigentes.
pay to
Estas
keep
son
them
normativas
current.
que no
These
estaban en
norms
el
do not exist in the
anterior.
past legislation.
Y
And
este
this
es
is
un
one
aspecto
aspect
muy
that is
interesante
quite
para
interesting
el tema que
for
nos
what
ocupa
we are
y que
talking
de
about
alguna
now,
forma
and that in
tiene
a
que ver
certain way
muchísimo
has to do a lot
con
with the
los
efforts
esfuerzos del
of the
sector
public
público,
sector
que tienen que
that have to be
vincularse
connected
también
also
con
with
nuestro
our
entorno nacional, donde
surroundings, where
en
in
la
the
ley
current law,
actual hay una exención
there's
del
an exemption of
50% en
50%
las
of
tasas
the
para todas las instituciones de nivel educativo, para las
fees
personas
for anybody
inscritas
who signed up
para
to
trabajar
write
en
in
cultura y del
culture, to
arte
work in
y
culture and
para
in
las micro y
arts, and for
pequeñas empresas.
SMEs.
Y estas
And these
exempciones
exemptions
son
are
muy
very
importantes
important
ponerlas
to
en el
put into
contexto de
into the
todos los
context of all the
programas
programs
o
or public
políticas
policies
públicas que
that
tienen que
must be
hacerse
carried out that are
vinculadas
connected or
específicas
specific
a los sectores a
to
donde
the
van
sectors
dirigidas,
that they're aimed
porque
at,
es una
because it is a
forma de
way of
motivar e
motivating and
incentivar
incentivizing
que la gente
people to
registre
have them
y
really patent
proteja sus
and,
derechos.
and protect their
Este es un
rights.
breve
This is a brief
esquema
scheme
de
of the
los cambios
changes
en
in
la
the
normativa.
norm.
Hay
There's
más,
there's
¿verdad? Hay
more
más de contenido legal.
legal content that
No
I
creería
don't think is
pertinente
pertinent to
traerlos
bring
aquí a
to
la
the
mesa
table,
a este foro, sino más bien
but
enfocarlos
to focus
en
more
los
on
temas
the
que tienen que ver con el tema
main
principal de
issue
esto. Entonces,
that brings us here this
para
morning.
llegar
So
al
to get
tema
to
de
the
los retos y
challenges
oportunidades de la normativa
and
nacional,
opportunities,
tenemos
we
que
have to
pasar
necessarily go
necesariamente
through
por
the
el
international
contexto
context that
internacional
we're
que
living.
estamos viviendo. Y eso lo
And
tenemos que
that
pasar
we have to
necesariamente
necessarily
porque
go
estamos
through,
viviendo
because
una
we're going through a
transformación de los
transformation
derechos
of
de
the
propiedad
IP laws
intelectual vinculada a las nuevas tecnologías,
that is connected to
que
new
no es nada
technologies.
nuevo.
And this is not new.
Definitivamente se nos olvida,
We seem to
y se
forget.
nos olvida porque la vida no nos
We forget
permite
because
recordarnos de tanto
we
en el día a
forget
día,
with the
pero se nos
day-to-day.
olvida que el fonógrafo vino a cambiar
Phonograph
la forma
changed
de la
music
música, de llevarla a la
and allowed us
casa,
to play
y
music at
pasaron
home.
años en que se hiciera la
And
normativa
it
sobre
was years
los
before
programas o sobre los
there were norms created to
productores
protect
de fonogramas,
phonograms,
o la misma
or even the
imprenta que
printing
tardó
press
años
that took
en darse la legislación del
years
derecho de
to,
autor.
it's
Algo así está
something like
pasando,
this
solo
that
que
we're not caught up
1000
yet,
veces
but it's
más
1,000
rápido.
times faster.
Pero es bien importante
But
que
it is important that
sepamos
we understand
que en el contexto
that the
internacional lo que
international
estamos
context, what we're
viviendo
living through,
en áreas
is
distintas.
different. And let's
Separémoslas para
separate
tratar
things
de
to try to
contextualizar
put everything
el
into
sentido o
context,
el
the
mensaje
message,
de esta
or the sense of this
presentación.
presentation.
En materia de derechos de autor,
In copyright
hemos vivido
matters, we have gone
casos
through
realmente impactantes
in
desde el punto de
amazing
del,
examples
del
of the
uso de las
use
obras
of the
protegidas por
protected
derecho de autor, que como sabemos,
pieces
y
by
como
copyright,
todos
as we all know,
como bien
and
lo
as was well
explicaba
explained
Patrick,
by
de
Patrick,
esos bienes, los non-real goods,
these
son
assets
tan
that are so important
en
in
un ámbito
in
que
an
tiene que
area
ver
that
con
has to do not
no solo
only
con
with
propiedad
IP,
intelectual, sino que con
intellectual
todas
property, but also the
diferentes
transfer of
tecnologías
technologies
y
and
todo lo
everything
que
that
se
is
determina
shared as
de
of
esa
that
creación,
creation,
es
it's
bien
very
importante
important to
también
know
saber que ciertos
that certain
casos han ido
cases have
cambiando la
been
historia. Por ejemplo, el
changing
caso
the
Google
history,
Books, que
such
digitalizó
as when
libros
books became
sin haber pedido permiso
digitized,
previo a los editores en Estados
um,
Unidos.
books that
Un
were
caso que
digitized in the
cambia
US
la
without
percepción
asking the author
del
for
uso
permission.
justo, fair use, de las obras de derecho de autor. Ya se venían, como sabemos, hay excepciones del derecho de autor que se
There's
venían
some
dando
copyrights,
desde la OMPI, Convenio de Berna, de
WIPO,
1886, pero viene la digitalización
digitizing,
y cambia un poco el
changes.
sentido de la utilización de las obras. Por decirlo de alguna
It
forma,
changes the context and
amplía un
broadens
poco
the
la
use
utilización. Y ni se
and
diga
other
otras cosas
things
que
that
han ido
happen going
pasando
on
simultáneamente
simultaneously,
o en el transcurso de las últimas 2 décadas, como la creación de Creative
like
Commons, que
Creative
es
Commons,
un
which is
sistema
a
de licenciamiento
licensing
preestandarizado
pre-standardized
a
system,
partir de usos digitales de obras mayormente. El tema del software del código abierto, que
open
también
software,
es todo un mecanismo donde el software también ha evolucionado en función de la
the use and the
utilización
free
libre
use of
del código
source
fuente
codes
bajo sistemas
under standardized
estandarizados.
systems.
Y ni se
And
diga la última caso de Google y Oracle, un conflicto bien reciente
and the
sobre la
case of
utilización
Oracle that we recently
de
saw
unas
on some
aplicaciones
apps that were
vinculadas
connected to
a
software.
Esos son
These are
casos que
cases that
definitivamente inciden y
definitely, and
terminan
then we end up
con la inteligencia
with
artificial
generative
generativa que
AI
recién se
that
está
we are
ahorita decidiendo en Europa.
just
¿Y
now
por qué esto es
looking into in
importante?
Europe. And why is this
Porque
important?
tenemos
Because
que
we have to look at the
contextualizar
context.
de
We have to
que
understand that
esta
this
situación
world
mundial
situation
que está
that is going
pasando
through, that we're going
afecta,
through,
ya sea
affects us
para
for
bien o para
good
mal,
or for
dependiendo de
evil,
dónde se
depending on
mire,
what point of view you have.
a la
It
utilización de
affects the
las obras,
use
a
of
permitir
those
utilizar
assets so that
ciertas
we can
obras,
use some
ampliar
assets and
los
we can
usos
broaden its
o no
use or not broaden
ampliarlos.
its use.
Entonces,
So
el
the
contexto
international
internacional
context
en
based
base a
on the
las
new
nuevas tecnologías
technologies
está
is
marcando
paving
y
the
está
way,
haciendo
and it
que
is
los
making
derechos,
the rights
como
as we
tradicionalmente
have
se han
traditionally
concebido,
known them
estén
can
evolucionando de una
evolve
forma
in a very
bastante
fast
rápida.
way.
En patentes, por ejemplo,
In patents, there's very
bien
brief
breves,
examples,
es por
such
ejemplo, el
as
caso
Moderna
Moderna
Pfizer
Pfizer,
case, where
donde el
the
sistema que
system,
tenía
the
de ADN
modified
modificado que
DNA that
tenía
Moderna had,
eh, Moderna demanda a
Moderna
Pfizer
sued
por
Pfizer
esa
for that
infracción de
IP
patente, pero durante
infringement,
la
but during
pandemia dice,
COVID said,
no me voy a meter
well,
en
I
ese
won't
pleito.
go into
Y
this
ahora
now.
que la pandemia prácticamente
And after
terrible
COVID
y todo,
ended, well,
siguen
there still
habiendo
are
algunos
some
reclamos de
claims
por
of
qué no se está
why
sacando
are we
licenciamiento
not
y bueno, es
seeking
un tema
licensing? And
legal
it's an important
importante a
legal
reseñar.
issue,
Y ni se
and
diga la
even more
inteligencia
so
artificial que
AI,
ahora
which
ya
now
se permite como
it is
en
as in
Australia, el
Australia, there
primer
was the
caso
first case of
donde un
where a program,
un
a
software se le
software
permite ser
can
inventor.
invent, can
Algo
create.
que
This
rompe el esquema
breaks the paradigm
tradicional de que
that
el
the inventor,
inventor,
the
el creador,
creator,
tiene
has
que
to
ser
be a
público.
human being.
Entonces, ese
So this
contexto internacional
international
no lo
context, well,
podemos perder. Y
we
ya no
cannot
podemos,
lose this, and
no porque sea
not
una
because it's a
referencia o
reference or
no,
not, but because
porque todo lo
everything
que
that
está
is happening
sucediendo a través de
through
estas
these
decisiones
decisions
y
and
de
these
estos casos
cases
y de
and these
estas interpretaciones
interpretations
nos afecta el
affect
derecho. Y al
our
afectar el
right. And
derecho,
when it affects our
tenemos que
right, we
también
have to
ver
see
cómo se
how
puede sacar
we can
provecho positivo o negativo
take
de esto en
advantage of this,
función de que muchas de estas
because many
cosas
of these things
son
are
medios
means to
para generar
generate
desarrollo, no
development.
necesariamente
They're
son el
not
fin.
the end, they're a
La propiedad
means.
intelectual es un
IP is a
medio para
means
tener el
to
desarrollo. Entonces,
have development. So
es
it's important
importante que, por
that,
ejemplo, en
such as
el
in the
tema de patentes,
patent
que es el que más nos
issue that
ocupa,
really
y
occupies
que ya
us, and we
sabemos que
know
la
that patent,
patente, el que yo sé que
I know
aquí
that here
no podemos
we
volvernos a
cannot
lo
go back
básico,
to the
porque ya
basics,
sabemos
but
que
we
la
know that the
patente
patent
es
is
un
an
derecho
exclusive
exclusivo
right
en el tiempo,
through
20
time.
años,
It's 20 years
donde toda
where
la
all the
información se
information is
divulga
shared
ante la autoridad
to the
y esa
people, and that
información
information
queda
is
en los
stays
registros.
in the registry,
Después de los 20 años pasa al dominio público y ese
and
sistema
then
de
it goes
patentes
to
es el que
public domain.
permite,
And that's a
como
system that allows,
muy
as
bien
was well
explicaba
explained by Patrick,
el
it
que permite que
allows
se siga dando
us
esa
to continue
cadena,
having
ese
this chain,
sistema de
this system of
innovación en base al
innovation based on
reconocimiento.
acknowledgement.
Pero
But
muchas
many
empresas
of the
en el entorno
companies
mundial están
in the
diciendo,
world are saying,
mejor me protejo por secreto industrial para no
I'll use
divulgar,
industrial
dados los conflictos de
secrets so I don't
patentes o
share,
patentes
because
de
there's some
bloqueo que hay
blocking
ahora.
patents now.
Y entonces
So we're
se está
talking a
dando
lot
mucho
about
secreto
industrial
industrial, donde
secrets,
no
where
se
nothing
divulga
is
nada,
shared,
sino
but
que se
it's
guarda,
kept.
donde
Where
no se
nothing is
comparte
shared,
nada, queda
it's restricted.
restringido. Entonces,
Those
esos
changes
cambios
that
que no
not
necesariamente
that
se
are
veían en el
overlooked
día a
on the
día,
day-to-day
están
are
sucediendo
happening
ahorita en
now
el entorno mundial,
in
todo el tema de
the world,
medicina,
in medicine, in
nuevas
new
formas de
ways of
protección de medicina
protecting,
como el
such as the
black
black
box
box
medicine,
medicine.
que es un tema
That is
que se
something
empieza a
that we're now
hablar, y de
talking about, and
del
big
big
data.
data vinculado a los exámenes médicos y todo eso, que es un
It's
tema
all important.
importante.
So
Entonces, ya sabemos que la
we know
patente es
that
un derecho
patents are an
exclusivo sobre
exclusive
una
right
invención.
on
Se
an
posee sobre el producto o proceso. Así estamos.
and
Y
when
cuando
the
vence la
patent
patente, pasa al
expires, it
dominio
goes to public
público.
domain,
Y esa
and that
información todos la
information
podemos
can be
acceder.
used by
Y es ahí
everyone.
donde
And
vamos un
that's
poco
where we
a hacer la
go to the
conclusión de
conclusion
esta
of this
presentación, donde
presentation, where the
la
new
nueva
norm
normativa y en general la
and the
normativa
Salvadorian
salvadoreña
law
puede
can give
darnos
us new
oportunidades
opportunities as
también.
well,
¿Y por qué? Porque se
because
nos
we
olvida
forget
que la
that
información, no solo la
information,
del
not only
dominio
that of public
público,
domain,
ya no hay
when there's no
patente
more
en El
patents in El
Salvador,
Salvador,
sino
but
que la
the
propia información
information
que
that
está
is
en
in
otros
other
registros de
registries and
patentes
other
en otras
jurisdictions,
jurisdicciones,
when
donde está
it's
disponible al
available to the
público,
people,
y
and
información
information
que se
that
puede
can be
utilizar, la
used,
mejor
like
bibliografía,
bibliographies,
está
is
en
in
los
the
registros de
patent
patentes,
registries,
no
not necessarily
necesariamente
in
en revistas
scientific
científicas.
reviews.
Y es ahí
And
donde
that's
los
where the
mecanismos
mechanisms for
para
countries
países
like
como el nuestro
ours
tienen que
have to
ponerle mucho énfasis
emphasize and stress
al tema de
the having
acceder a
access to
información
information, to IT
tecnológica.
information.
Y es así
And
como la
that's
ley de
how the
propiedad
IP
intelectual, la que va a
law
entrar en
that will
vigencia
be passed in
en
February
febrero, tiene ya algunas
has some
excepciones
exceptions already
que se
that are
conoce como
that are
excepción
known as
Polar,
a
que es la cual
Polar
se puede
exception,
usar
that is where
información
we produce
patentada
patented information
para
to
estar listos para someter
make sure that
a
it is
aprobación
approved,
un producto a la
that a
autoridad
sanitary
sanitaria,
product is approved
y eso
by,
no se
and
considera
it's not a
violación,
violation, that's
tiene varios postulados para que
it
sea
can be used
utilizada de
in
buena
good
fe,
faith,
pero
but
es una
it's an
excepción que
exception
está
that is
específicamente
specifically
mencionada en la
mentioned in
nueva
the new
normativa.
norms.
También
There's
hay un
also an
artículo
article
que
that
habla del
talks about the
derecho de buena
right
fe
of
de
the
uso
good
anterior,
faith
que
of the
si alguien
past
venía
use, that if
utilizando
somebody
de
had been
buena
using
fe
something in
una
good faith, some
tecnología
technology or
que
something that
después es
later was
presentada para
presented
patente en
to
El
be patented in
Salvador,
Salvador,
se puede
it
permitir
that
seguir
it can
utilizando siempre y
continue
cuando
being
no haya
used if there was
existido
no
ninguna
malice.
mala fe en la utilización o la obtención de esa información. Y artículo
Another
interesante donde es
interesting
el
article,
artículo
275,
265 de la Ley de
the
Propiedad
IP
Intelectual, donde
law
dice que el
says that the
instituto va a
institute will
publicar los
publish
derechos caducados o la
the
información técnica que está en el
information that
dominio
is now
público.
public domain.
Y entonces, todo
All of
esto es
this is important
importante
because
porque
these
son
are
mecanismos de
mechanisms of
acceso a
access to information
información que no
that not
necesariamente
necessarily,
que son mecanismos de
or
un
they
producto que se tenga que
of a product
patentar
that
o
has to be
licenciar.
licensed or
Y
patented. These are
son
mechanisms
mecanismos que
that
el mismo
the
sistema de
IP
propiedad
system
intelectual permite,
allows,
que forman parte
that are
de
part
todo el
of
engranaje de derechos y de
the
cadenas que muy bien
rights
explicaba
and
Patrick,
everything
y
that
que
Patrick was
tienen
explaining so
ese
well,
contenido
that
de
has this
utilización
content.
de información. Entonces,
So
aquí,
here,
y para ser breve y
and to be
contextualizar,
brief and put you into
son
context,
básicamente
it's
las
basically
oportunidades y retos que tenemos con la nueva normativa. No solo es la nueva normativa,
it's a new
y esto
norm.
es bien
It's
importante,
not just a new norm, it's
es
it's
la
the
implementación
implementation
de
of
los
these
servicios en
online
línea
services
que desde el
that since
2020 viene
2020
prestando el registro de
has
propiedad
been provided
intelectual.
by
Al
the IP,
menos
at
en El
least in El Salvador.
Salvador, el
They have
Centro
been doing it
Nacional de
anyway. The
Registros ha tenido una
center, the
evolución
registration center has had a
muy
fast
rápida de
evolution
todos los servicios
of
de
all of the
protección de los
services of the
derechos de
IP
propiedad
rights.
intelectual. Y esa
And that
parte
part
todavía necesita
still needs to
difusión
be
dentro del mismo
better
sistema de innovación
understood and
nacional,
shared within the
porque
country
ahora
because
facilita
it really
muchísimo
makes
más
life easier,
acceder
makes
a
it
la
easier
protección
to
de los
have
derechos.
access to protect your rights.
Ni se diga con los apoyos que
And
sí
there is some
existen,
support,
por ejemplo, algunos ejemplos como
such
el
as
CATI, que
CATI,
es el
which is a
Centro de
center
Apoyo
for
a la
support to
Tecnología y la
innovation
Innovación, que
technology
lo
that is handled by
lo manejan en el
the
Centro
National
Nacional de Registros,
Registry,
o las actividades que tiene con la MIPE
or the
y el
activities
Ministerio de Economía, por mencionar
on
algunos.
the MIPID, to mention just a
Entonces,
few.
uno de los mejores ejemplos que puedo mencionar en este foro es el
One
convenio
of
de
the best
aceleración de
examples I can give
patentes
is the
que acaba de
patent acceleration
suscribirse entre El Salvador
agreement
y la
that was
Oficina de
signed between
Patentes de
the
Estados Unidos
US
en el
in
2024,
2024 in El Salvador.
que es
There is obviously
evidentemente un mecanismo
a mechanism
que
that
positivo
is
desde
positive
todo
from all
punto de
points of
vista,
views,
porque necesariamente las patentes que vienen a
because the
nuestro
patents
país
that come here,
de alta tecnología, es importante que vengan y que se inscriban
it's
y se
important that
protejan en el territorio. Y este convenio
this
ayuda a
agreement
que se acelere
helps
la
accelerate
protección
the
en
protection
base a criterios
based
de
on
examen y respetando la normativa nacional.
the norms.
Entonces, Estos solo son
These are
algunos
just some
ejemplos
examples
de
of
cómo
how
estos
these
sistemas, al
systems
menos de la acreditación de
crediting
los
the
derechos,
rights
tienen que estar
have
bien
to be well
engranados en
ingrained
un
in a
esquema
scheme
de
of innovation
innovación o un sistema
or a
nacional de
national system of
innovación.
innovation.
Y al
And at the
final,
end,
y con esto
and
pues,
with this, I wrap
termino mi
up.
presentación, es bien importante que
It's very
ese
important
fomento de
that
innovación
this local
local
innovation and knowing
y sabiendo mucho que la tecnología y
that
el
the
entorno mundial que
world
expliqué
entourage
sobre
of
cómo los
how
derechos
rights
van
evolve,
evolucionando, los de propiedad
IP
intelectual
rights,
van
law,
evolucionando,
IP
estos activos
laws evolve,
intangibles
these
cada vez
intangible
toman
assets
más
become more
valor.
valuable.
Es cierto, cada vez
They need
necesitan
more
protección,
protection,
es cierto. Y
and
necesitamos
we need
integrarlos en El
to
Salvador
protect them
tanto
in El
como
Salvador.
se está pretendiendo hacer. Pero
But
también
also, the
los beneficios
benefits
derivados
of
del
the
sistema,
system,
esa
this
disponibilidad de
availability of
información
information
también
also has to,
tenemos que
we
tenerla
also
a la
have to have it
mano.
at hand.
¿Por qué? Porque la vinculación entre empresa, universidad y
Because
sector público es la base. Y esa
this,
última lámina de Patrick, donde
like Patrick
decía
said, the
el
support,
aporte
when the
donde
universities and the
entran los
private
privados
private
a dar ese financiamiento
investment or
o a dar
financing,
ese impulso es.
that
Pero la
shove,
vinculación
it's
es
all very important.
necesaria
Everything has to be
y
connected,
es necesaria
and it's necessary to
tenerla
have it,
presente no solo para
not
generar
just to
derechos, lo cual es
generate or to
importante,
create
pero
rights,
también para
but also to
entender que el
understand that the
sistema de
IP
propiedad
system
intelectual tiene
has
formas
ways
de
of
recibir
receiving
información
information based
basada
on
en
access,
acceso,
based on
basada en la ampliación de los derechos,
rights, based
basada
on
en lo que
what we
estamos
are
viendo en
seeing
el
now
tema digital y en muchas
in many
otras
other
áreas.
areas.
Y ni se diga el tema de promover
And even
apoyos de
more so,
licencias y franquicias. Y esto es
licenses and
importante, aunque
franchises.
parezca algo muy
Even
repetitivo, pero
though
en un
I may sound
entorno
repetitive,
como El
but in El Salvador,
es bien
it's very
importante
important
el
to,
tema, y no estoy hablando
and I'm not
necesariamente de
talking about
licencias y franquicias
licenses and
del sector de
franchises of
servicios,
services
de un
of a
restaurante,
restaurant.
no solo eso,
Not only
estamos
that,
hablando
we're
ya
talking about
de
franchises
franquicias y
and
licenciamientos
licenses
de las
of
propias
the
empresas que
companies
van
that
a
will
dar nuevas
provide new
tecnologías,
technologies,
servicios de nuevas tecnologías, firma
digital
digital,
signatures,
que van a dar inteligencia
AI for
artificial para
businesses,
negocios y todo
and
esto que es
everything that
algo que se nos va a
that
venir
is coming
de una forma
and
bastante
fast.
rápida a nuestros países, principalmente en un país donde se le está apostando al tema
And we're
digital
betting on
bastante.
technology heavily in El Salvador.
Entonces tenemos
So
que tener, hay más
there's
elementos
many more elements
de tener en
to keep
cuenta,
in mind,
evidentemente,
obviously.
¿verdad? Pero estos son
These are just a
algunos
few
que tienen mucho que ver en función de
that
la
have a lot to
normativa
do
que
with
se
the
está dando,
norms
en
and
función del entorno, en función de
and
ciertos
certain
cambios que se
changes
están dando en el entorno
in
mundial.
the world
Y al
scenario.
final, y
And with
con
this,
esto termino,
I finish.
es bien importante saber
It's
que la propiedad
important to know
intelectual
that intellectual
subyace
property
entre
is
derecho y acceso. Los
underlies
plazos de protección son para
between the
eso,
right and
para que cuando
access.
terminen
So
exista
there can
acceso.
always be
Y eso es
access.
importante.
It's important to always have access. Knowing
Sabiéndolo utilizar es una
how to
herramienta
use it is a
valiosísima para
valuable
la
tool
innovación.
for innovation.
Entonces,
So
los
incentives
incentivos en la protección de los
and
derechos
the protection of the rights are
necesarios
necessary. They need
necesitan
to be
hacerse
done
y
and they need to
estar
be there
para el sistema
for
de
the innovation
innovación y para
system and
seguir,
for the
para que la
people
gente tenga
to
esos
have these
incentivos.
incentives.
Entonces, la protección y los
So
mecanismos de
protection, the
acceso
mechanisms of
potencian el
access
conocimiento humano y aumentan la
encourage
efectividad,
creativity
evidentemente aplicadas ahorita en
when
el
they are
tema
applied
del
to El
Salvador.
Salvador
Así
right
que
now. So
yo me
I'll
quedo
stop
ahí,
here,
¿verdad? Y quedo
and
atento
I
a
know
todas las
there will
preguntas
be
y
Q&A
respuestas.
later on.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Danilo. Y continuamos con
Thank
la
you, Danilo. Now we'll
presentación
have
de Pedro
Pedro's
Argumedo sobre
presentation
la
on
patente
patents in
en
Central America.
Centroamérica. Recordar que puede
Remember that
poner
you
sus
can
preguntas
put your
en el
questions there
botoncito de
in the Q&A,
Q&A
pressing the Q&A
por
button.
cualquier
If
pregunta
you
que
have any, you can type them up there.
Buenos días, ¿se me escucha?
Good morning.
Sí, sí.
Perfecto. Voy a poner el puntero, perdón, voy a poner el puntero láser para poder dirigirme mejor. Bueno, es un gusto poder, ¿cómo se
Okay, it's a
llama?
pleasure to
Seguir, ¿cómo se llama? Con esta
continue with this
interesante webinar
webinar
sobre la
on
propiedad
IP.
intelectual. En nuestro caso, en el
In our
Departamento
case,
de Estudios Económicos, hemos
we
estado
have been working
trabajando
on
el tema de
innovation,
innovación y
and
una de
one
las
of the
áreas ha
areas has
sido
been
el
the
tema de la propiedad
IP
intelectual y
properties and
patentes, ¿verdad?
patents, and
Y vamos a tratar
we
de
will
hacer
try
una
to make a
pequeña
brief
síntesis
summary of
por qué son
why it's
importancia y
important
cómo podemos encontrar
and how we can find
estadísticas
statistics
que nos muestran los desafíos
that
que
show us the
aquí tenemos
challenges we have
en El Salvador y
in
en
El
los países de
Salvador and Central America with regards to
respecto a cómo aprovechar el desarrollo de
how to
patentes
use
para tener un
patents for
crecimiento alto
high
y
and sustained
sostenido.
growth,
Y también trazar
and also to
algunas
trace some
ideas
ideas
que son
that are
críticas para poder
of vital
promover
importance to be able to promote
mejor
a better
entorno, mejor
ecosystem
ecosistema,
or
como bien decía
environment,
Patrick y lo señalaba Danilo al final, de que es importante este
as Danilo
ecosistema
and Patrick mentioned,
entre las
between the
empresas,
companies,
la
the
academia
academia,
y el
and the
gobierno para
government
poder
to be able to
promover
promote
la
innovation
innovación y la
and the
creación
creation of
de
patents
patentes para proteger esos derechos y
to
poder
protect those
que todos
rights.
disfrutemos de los avances tecnológicos. Bueno, un primer punto
First point
importante es
is
que,
that
como
as
sociedad
a people,
nosotros tenemos el gran
we have the
desafío de
challenge
buscar un crecimiento
of
que
seeking
sea
a growth that is
acelerado,
accelerated
unas tasas de crecimiento arriba
over
del
5%,
5% o
7%,
7%,
and that
y
is
que sea
sustainable.
sostenido, ¿verdad? Es decir, el crecimiento tiene que
Growth has
tener
to have
esas
these
dos
two
condiciones,
conditions.
que sea
It has to be
veloz
fast
y que se mantenga por largo tiempo
and long-standing.
hacia adelante. Ahora, eso, la experiencia internacional ha
Now,
demostrado que se ha logrado cuando hay
this
procesos
we
de
can see when there's
innovación
innovation processes
y creación de
and creation of
nuevos
new
desarrollos
IT,
tecnológicos,
new
nuevos
products, new
productos, nuevos
processes,
procesos. Y todo eso se
and all
convierte
of
en
this
progreso
becomes IT
tecnológico. El
progress.
progreso
The
tecnológico
progress
es
is
el
the
fundamento
base
para ese crecimiento acelerado
for
y
the sustained
sostenido.
and accelerated
Y
growth,
este
and this
progreso tecnológico se ha
has been
identificado
identified more
más
as an
como
innovation.
innovación, ¿verdad? Y nosotros
We
sabemos que
know
la
that
innovación
an
es
innovation
todo
is
aquel
everything that
nuevo
is new
conocimiento
knowledge
que
that
llega al
comes to the
mercado.
market. Now,
Ahora, esta
this
innovación
innovation is
se
based
basa
on
en tres
three big
grandes
pillars.
pilares. Por
On the
una
one hand,
parte está el gran
the
pilar de
big
la
pillar of
investigación.
investigation,
Mencionó Patrick y Danilo, pues está la
and then there's
creación de
creation of
nuevo
new knowledge
conocimiento que
that
crea
creates
una
a disruption
disrupción en cómo se
in
desarrollan
how things,
el intercambio
uh,
de
uh,
bienes o de
new
nuevos
services
servicios,
or
pero
goods
es
are exchanged. But it's pure
investigación pura. En
investigation. In the
el caso de
case of
Estados
the
Unidos, Patrick
US,
señalaba que el gobierno de Estados Unidos
the government
invierte la
invests, as
mayor
Patrick
parte
was
en
saying, a lot of in
investigación
investigation
de
of basic
ciencia básica,
sciences.
y
And then
luego con
with
esa
that
investigación de ciencia
investigation
básica está todo
are
el
developed
desarrollo de
products.
productos. Es decir,
So
cómo con ese conocimiento básico desarrollo nuevos
with that
productos,
knowledge, I
ya
develop
sean
new
bienes o
goods or
servicios.
services. This
Este
is
es el
a
famoso I
E
más D.
plus D.
Entonces, esta
So
parte central, y aquí es donde hay
and
mucha
here there's a lot of
ingeniería,
engineering and a lot of
muchos
different
diferentes áreas
areas
del
of
conocimiento que
that
permiten
allow us
ese
to
desarrollo de
develop this
valor.
value chain.
Se puede realizar
This
siempre
can
y
be carried
cuando
out if and
haya
when there is
talento
human
humano.
talent.
Entonces ahí
So
se
there we
vincula con el
connect it
sistema
with the educational
educativo y el
system.
desarrollo de habilidades. Entonces es muy importante que
It's very
desarrollar tanto
important
que todos tengan
that
acceso a
everybody has
primaria,
access
todos
to
tengamos educación universal
universal
a
education,
secundaria y que la mayor parte
and that
pueda
most of
acceder
them
a
can be
formación
have access
universitaria
to
o continua.
continuous
Entonces aquí es muy
education.
importante el talento humano porque con
So
este
here,
talento
human
humano se puede
talent
hacer
can
investigación
carry out
básica y con
basic
este talento humano se
investigation
puede
and
hacer el
also the
desarrollo.
development.
Entonces está bien
So
atado.
it all goes hand in
Ahora,
hand. Another
otro
element
elemento a través de las
that we
presentaciones
saw through the
de,
presentations
de-
of
de
Patrick and
y
Danilo
Danilo es que
is
hay
that
un
there is an
ecosistema
ecosystem
alrededor.
around this.
Es decir, hay un conjunto de
There's a
actores
group of
que
people
no
that
los
we
vemos, pero
don't
que
see,
inciden.
but
Por
that are
ejemplo,
there. For
hemos
example,
tenido está bien claro el tema del rol
we
de
have
la
seen the role of
institucionalidad, el
institutionality,
tema de las
the
leyes de propiedad
IP
intelectual,
laws,
todos
all
los
of the
elementos que
elements
abarcan
that are
la
covered,
protección intelectual.
and
Y ese es
that's
un tema
something that is
institucional.
institutional.
También está todo el tema de
We
las
have public
políticas
policies
públicas
of a
del
government
gobierno, ¿verdad? Para
to
promover
promote
la relación
the
entre la
relationship between the
academia
academia and
y las
the
empresas,
businesses,
¿verdad? Así como crear un
just like
clima
we
de
create a
inversión
business environment
donde pueda
where that can be,
financiarse
all
todas
these new
estas nuevas
ideas can be
ideas que
financed
tienen los
for the
investigadores y
investigators,
que
and that
esto se
this can
convierte en un
become a
sistema
system
que
that
funcione
works
y
and
y que
that it
permite esa
allows the
interacción
interaction
de una
in a
manera
more
más eficiente y
efficient
eficaz.
way.
Cuando
When
esto
this
sucede,
happens,
es que tenemos una
it
innovación
means that
bien
we have strong
fuerte,
innovation, we
tenemos
have
un desarrollo
a
de
product
productos
development that,
tecnológicos, estamos
as
viendo
we're
ahora
seeing
con la
now with
inteligencia
AI,
artificial, y eso se transforma en crecimiento.
and that is
acelerado y
accelerated and
sostenido.
sustained. So
Entonces, por esas
because of
razones
those
es que la
reasons,
innovación
innovation
juega un rol muy
has an
importante.
important role.
Ahora, vamos a
Now,
utilizar
we
un
will use a
índice
global
global,
index
un índice de innovación global que lo
that
elabora
is
la
created
Organización
by
Mundial de la
the
Propiedad
WIPO
Intelectual con la Universidad de
with
Cornell
the
y el Centro
university
Europeo de
and the
Administración de Negocios.
European
Entonces,
Institute for
este
Business.
índice se elabora
This is an index that
anualmente
is drafted every year,
y el último publicado es el
and the last one was published in
2024
2024,
y
and
tiene
it has
133
133
países.
countries coming
Y
together.
este índice se
This
basa en
index is
dos
based on
grandes
two big areas.
áreas. Uno son los
One is
insumos,
the
¿verdad? Es decir,
raw
la materia
goods
prima que
that
permite
allow
crear
for
innovación,
innovation,
son
the
las
laws,
leyes,
the
el
human
capital humano,
capital,
el desarrollo de
development of
infraestructura, o como
infrastructure,
la
and the
sofisticación
sophistication
del
of the
mercado
market.
y sofisticación empresarial. Esos son
These
como
are
elementos
the
que nos
elements
permiten
that would
tener
allow
esos
us to have
insumos
these
básicos
basic
para llegar a
inputs
los productos
to
de la
get to the
innovación, que
innovative
son
products, which
los
are the
bienes
goods
y
and
servicios que
services that
son
are
innovadores,
innovative, that are
nuevos
new
o
or
mejorados,
improved,
y todos
and
los
all of the
productos
creative
creativos
ones
que están surgiendo también ahora pues, por inteligencia artificial o
and
otros que estaban
others.
anteriormente. Ahora, esto es una medición bien
This is
compleja
very complex,
y para efectos del
and
tema de
for patents
y de
and
propiedad
IP,
intelectual, nos vamos a
we
centrar
will
en observar el
focus on
desempeño del capital humano,
human
investigación,
performance
la sofisticación empresarial y
and
conocimiento
IT
tecnológico,
knowledge,
para que podamos tener un foco
so that we can
lo que es lo
focus on what is
importante
important,
de que
which
son
is the
estos
three
tres
pillars
pilares para el tema que hemos
for
estado
what we have been
abordando.
covering.
Un primer punto
One first thing
del
of the
índice
Global
global de
Index of
innovación,
Innovation,
observando los
looking at the
rankings,
rankings, is
es que
that
debemos tener en cuenta que
the
la
Central
región
American region,
centroamericana, la mayor parte de países
mostly
presentan
some
unos
countries show
resultados
some results
muy rezagados en
that
innovación.
are, there's a
Para
lot of
comparar
lag in
una con
innovation.
124, 133
Out of
países,
133 countries, Guatemala is
Guatemala
122,
114,
Honduras 114, El Salvador is in 98,
República Dominicana en
Domret
el 97,
97,
perdón, sí, República Dominicana en la número 97,
Panama
Panamá en la
82,
82
and Costa
y
Rica
Costa
number
Rica en la
70.
70. Costa Rica es el país
Costa
que
Rica is
más
the country that
ha
has moved
avanzado
forward
en
the
tema de
most in
innovación
innovation.
y este es un
And
muy
this is
buen
a good
modelo que
model
vamos a ir
that we will
viendo
see
cuáles
what the
son los factores
critical
críticos que
factors
tiene
are
Costa Rica,
that
que
Costa
son muy
Rica has that are
similares a los
similar
que
to
tiene
what
Chile,
Chile
que es
has.
el país
Is the
latinoamericano
best
mejor posicionado
positioned
en el
country
ranking.
in the ranking.
Y
And then
están los
there's the,
países de
Switzerland,
Suiza, Estados
US,
Unidos, que hemos visto ahora que ocupó el tercer lugar en el ranking,
or
el caso de
Singapore,
Singapur, que ocupa el cuarto lugar,
placed fourth,
cuando
where
hace
50
50
years
años
ago,
atrás
Singapore
Singapur tenía
had a
un per cápita
GDP
más
that
bajo que el
was
promedio de
lower
los
than
países
most other
de
countries in Latin
Latinoamérica o
America or
Corea, por
Korea.
ejemplo. Entonces aquí
So
también ponemos
here
estos
we
datos
place
para que
this
puedan
data.
observar que hay un espacio para poder avanzar en países que tienen rezagos. Bueno, un tema
An
importante a
important
ver es
issue
que
is that
si
if we
agarramos la
grab the
serie
series
del índice global
of the Global
de
Index of
innovación,
Innovation, we
vemos
see
que el
that
país
the
tenía la
country
posición 58 en 2007 y retrocede al 2024.
went back, and
Esa
that
misma
same
situación le
situation
pasa
happens
a casi todos los países, incluyendo
to
Costa
almost
Rica,
all
que
the countries,
pasa de la
including
posición
Costa
51,
Rica.
termina en el lugar 70, o
So
sea,
it
cae
drops
19 puestos.
19
También vemos
places.
Panamá,
Also Panama
que cae en una posición
in
82,
place 82,
vemos
Nicaragua in the
posición más baja,
lowest, Honduras
en la
100,
posición
place
114
114, and Guatemala.
Pero sí hay
So
un
there's a
patrón,
pattern.
es decir,
There's a
de que
pattern.
la
Most
mayor
of the
parte de
countries
países hemos
have
hecho
moved
avances en
forward,
ciertas partes,
and
pero el
but
resto del
most
mundo
of the
se mueve
world
más veloz.
moves faster,
Y eso
and
hace
that
que
makes it so that
perdamos
we lose
posiciones.
positions.
Una
It's like a
competencia donde
competition
uno
where you
corre a
run at
concurso
a
de
certain
velocidad,
pace,
pero
but the
los
others
otros corredores
catch up
van
and are
más veloz.
faster. So
Entonces
we
ellos
are
quedan
always
más bajos para
behind,
nosotros
even though we
avanzar.
move
Entonces
forward.
esto nos da una luz que debemos de ser
We
más
have to
ágiles
be
en términos de las políticas
more agile
públicas.
in terms of public policies.
Ahora,
Now,
entrando
going
a
into
los
the
pilares,
pillars,
nos vamos a
and we'll
centrar
focus
en el pilar
on
del capital
human
humano e
capital and
investigación,
investigation,
es la base en
which
la
is the
cual se genera el
baseline for
conocimiento,
knowledge,
¿verdad?
and then the
Luego, los productos de
products of
conocimiento y
IT and
tecnología, donde
knowledge, where we
vemos los
look at
bienes y
goods and
servicios, y
services,
cómo
and
la
how the
sofisticación
sophistication
empresarial permite, ¿cómo se llama? Que
allows
se haya
new
nuevos
products,
proyectos, nuevos
new
bienes,
goods and
nuevos servicios
services.
o mejorados, ese tipo. Bueno, un
One
aspecto
aspect, the first
primero es
aspect here
que
is in
en
the
el
case
caso
of
del
human
capital
capital,
humano,
Costa
está en
Rica
la posición
is at
82.
82.
Es el país que
It
tiene
has a
mejor
better
posición
position,
y
and
podemos
you can
observar
see
cómo
how
con
with
mayor
more knowledge,
conocimiento tiene un
they have
mejor
better
resultado
results in
con un mejor
better
capital
human
humano, tiene
capital,
un mejor
better results
resultado en
in knowledge and
conocimiento y
IT,
tecnología y
and
un ambiente
a
empresarial
business
más
environment that is
sofisticado,
more
se hace productos
sophisticated.
más complejos. Está en
It's
la
in
posición
position
50
50
de
of
133
133
países.
countries.
Tenemos acá el
Here we
caso
got
de
the case of
Guatemala,
Guatemala,
que está
which
en la
is in
posición
position
126,
126,
en capital humano está bien rezagado, ¿verdad? En conocimiento y tecnología en la posición 109
and
en
in
sofisticación empresarial en
sophistication,
la posición
88.
88. Entonces, y así podemos
So
ver
we can
diferentes
see
países,
different
como el caso de
countries like El
que
Salvador,
tiene en capital humano
109,
109, en conocimiento
knowledge
101 y
101, and
sofisticación empresarial.
sophistication.
Entonces, un elemento clave es cuánto tenemos de
So a key thing
nuestro
is how much of our
esfuerzo, de
effort
nuestra calidad, de tener un
of
buen
a
capital
good
humano
human
de
capital
investigación
investigation
para
to
poder
move
avanzar
forward
en
in
tener
having good
buenos productos
products
y tener un
and
buen,
in having
una
good
buena
sophistication
sofisticación de
of
empresas que
companies that
hacen
make
esos
them.
productos.
Another
Otro dato
important data,
importante, lo hemos separado acá, nosotros le llamamos como las dos
we call it
ligas
like the
acá en
two leagues.
Centroamérica,
Central
que
America
tienen
and DUMREP
está
are
la
in
liga
one
que
league that
tiene
has
menor
less
desempeño,
performance,
y
and
aquí
here we
estamos
are
con
with
hiper
a
cápita
hyper
de
capital of goods and
11.718
services
para El
that's
Salvador, 10.518
10,000
para Guatemala y
and
7.000
7,000
para
for Honduras
Honduras
and
y
Nicaragua.
Nicaragua.
So
Entonces, claro, menor educación,
less education,
menor
less
producción de productos
IT
tecnológicos
products,
y menos sofisticación de
and less
de empresas,
sophistication is
está
related
relacionado
to
a esta poco
this little
generación de
generation of
valor.
value.
En cambio, tenemos
But
el
we have the
caso de
case of Costa
que
Rica
está también en un
that is
hiper cápita de 26.899 con un buen
has
resultado.
better results,
Y
and
llama la
it's
atención que Panamá,
interesting
que
that
tiene un
Panama,
hiper
that has
cápita
a
más
higher
alto, ¿verdad?
GDP,
Tiene
has
un
a
menor
lower
desempeño
rate
en
of
los indicadores.
indicators, and DUMREP
También que tiene un
that
hiper
has
cápita muy
a
parecido a
similar
Costa Rica,
GDP to Costa Rica
tiene un
has
menor
less
avance en
progress
estos
in these
pilares.
pillars. So
Entonces, si uno lo ve sobre la base de la teoría,
if
uno
you
puede
look at
decir
this, you could say
en
that
estos
in these
pilares que están
pillars that are
más fuertes,
stronger,
la
the
posibilidad de un
possibilities of
crecimiento
sustained
sostenible
growth and
y
accelerated
acelerado
growth.
la tiene Costa Rica por tener
Costa Rica has
esas
it because
bases
they have
más
the
fundamentadas, a
better
pesar de que
grounded,
República Dominicana tiene estos hiper capital muy similar
even though the
a
GDP
Costa
is so
Rica.
similar to Costa Rica.
Entonces,
So
ahora vamos a comenzar
now we
bajar
start looking at
los
the
subíndices
sub-indexes
para poder
so that we
comprender
can
algunos
understand
efectos
some
interesantes que
interesting
pueden ayudarnos a
facts that
definir
can
una ruta
help
de
you
cómo avanzar
see how to
hacia
move
un
towards or
aprovechar
taking advantage
el
of the human
capital humano
capital
que
we
tenemos
have
para poder
to produce
patentes
patents
y,
and
o
or
hacer uso
use
de los
different
diferentes
areas
del
of
proceso
IP.
intelectual. Bueno, un
First
primer
point
punto
is
es
that
que
in the
el
pillar
área
of
de
knowledge
conocimiento y
and
tecnología,
technology, the
la creación de
creation of
conocimiento
knowledge
en la
in the
región
region
está en las
is
posiciones bien
very
salvo Costa
behind,
Rica,
except for
que
Costa
está en la
Rica, which
posición
is in
189,
59.
pero
But
cuando
when we
vemos
look at the
creación de
creation of
conocimiento, que es
knowledge,
este
this is the
subíndice,
index, we see
vemos que
that
todos
all
los
the
países
countries
están
are
arriba de
over
ese. Es decir, que
100.
estamos
We
en un
are
indicador muy
we're very
rezagado,
behind, and
y
it's
porque
because
nosotros
we
generamos poco
don't
valor,
add a lot of value or we
pocos
don't create
patentes, ¿verdad?
patents.
Y
So
estamos en
we are
posiciones bien
well
atrasadas a
behind
nivel
globally.
global. También nuestra
Also,
generación de artículos científicos
scientific
está en las posiciones 130,
innovations, we're
129,
also behind
127,
Costa Rica
Rica en el
98.
98, ¿verdad? Entonces
So
tenemos
we don't
poca
have a lot of
investigación
research
de
in
ciencias
sciences,
duras
in
y
hard
documentos
sciences, and
citables
also
también.
documents that can be
Tenemos
quoted.
poca generación
We
de
don't
documentos
have a
citables,
lot.
quizás lo mejor posicionado es Panamá con el
Panama is
109,
doing
Costa Rica
before,
con el
but excuse me, better.
Entonces, pero un
Well,
hecho en general es que
in
tenemos
general, we
una
have a
debilidad
weakness
en la
in
parte de generación de
generating
conocimiento de base.
baseline knowledge.
Ahora, me
I
voy a
will
referir
refer
a
to
otros de los dos
the other
pilares, que es el
pillars
impacto del
that
conocimiento
are
y la
knowledge and the
educación.
discussion of knowledge. And
Y
for
para esto
this,
me
I
voy a
will
centrar en
focus
el
on the
caso de
case of
Costa
Costa
Rica.
Rica.
Pueden observar que Costa Rica
Costa
tiene un
Rica
buen
has a good
resultado en
result in
manufactura de alta
high
tecnología,
technology
porque
production.
se ha movido a elaborar
So it
bienes manufactureros, pero con alta
is
tecnología.
freezing.
Y
And
también
also,
tiene una complejidad, o sea,
it has a
mayor,
higher complexity.
hace
It
productos
does
más
more
complejos
complex products for
para la
exports.
exportación. En lugar 47
On
también
place
exporta productos de
47
alta tecnología en la
and
posición 24.
24,
Y
and
pueden
you can
observar en
see in the
exportaciones de
exports of
servicios TIC,
technology services,
en la posición 10
they're at the
mundialmente.
10th position
Tiene
globally.
un
So
enfoque
there's a focus
en
on
participar
participating
en
in
la
global
economía
economy,
global, produciendo
producing,
bienes de alta calidad, bien sofisticados, y eso
and
le permite
this
tener una economía área que genera ciertas dinámicas
This would create
para
certain
que todos
dynamics
los centros universitarios de
for
mejor calidad
better quality
puedan generar ese conocimiento y que tenga
and
un
to have an
incentivo
incentive for
que
the
las
universities
universidades y
and
las
the
empresas
companies
se
can
unan para
unite because
adquirir
they need to
conocimiento para
share
poder
knowledge to
competir
be able to
global.
compete globally.
El resto de países
The
de
rest of the
Centroamérica,
countries in
eso está
Central
muy
America
rezagado.
are
Y
behind,
podemos ver que el
and
caso
we
de
can see that the case of Panama
tiene un resultado
has
muy
interesting
interesante en
results.
exportaciones de alta tecnología.
But
Pero
here
acá
I
quiero
want
dejarles
to
una idea
leave
en
an
mente.
idea with you. The
Los
products
productos
that
que
we
exportamos
export
y con los que
and that we
comercializamos
trade
debieran de
should
transitar
transition
hacia una
towards a
estructura de
structure
bienes que sea
that is
más
more
sofisticada,
sophisticated,
sea
that is
más
more
de
high
alta tecnología.
technology.
Y esto lo vemos en el caso de
We
Costa
see this
Rica.
in the case of Costa Rica.
Ahora, una serie, esta la construyó
This
Álvaro,
was done by Alvaro.
en investigación que estamos realizando,
Um,
es la
presentation of
patentes,
patents in
en la
the
oficina de Estados Unidos de parte de los
USPTO.
países de Centroamérica.
You
Podemos
can
observar que
see
en
that
un
in a
periodo
period
de
of 50
50
years,
años, de
from
1965 a
all the way
2015,
2015 back,
Costa Rica
Costa
tiene
Rica
más
had the most patents,
patentes registrados,
418,
418, incluso
even
más que
more
todos juntos.
than the rest
Luego
together.
está
Then we have Panama,
Panamá con
the
193,
193,
República Dominicana
Dom Rep,
125,
Guatemala,
120,
El Salvador,
58,
Honduras 53,
53,
Nicaragua
29
29,
y Belice 7.
so
Entonces,
and
aquí nos
Belize
damos
7. So
cuenta
here we
de
realize
cómo los buenos
how,
indicadores
with good
en
indicators in education, in
en sofisticación de
sophistication
empresas
of
y
companies,
en, en generación de
generation
productos
of
más
more
complejos,
complex products
lleva a que se
makes
generen más
us generate
patentes,
more patents,
como lo
as
vemos
in
en
the
el caso
case
de
of Costa
Rica.
Rica.
Y esta es la
So
dinámica
this
de El
is the
Salvador más
dynamics of
recientemente.
El Salvador.
Acá pueden ver que hubo
You
un
can see that there
aumento
was an
en
increase.
creación de patentes tanto domésticas como en el extranjero en el periodo 2015-2018.
2018, also there was a project
Apoyado
supported
por AID en
by
aquel momento
AID back then.
era un proyecto
That was for
para
the
que las
universities
universidades y las
and the
empresas
businesses and the
y el
government,
gobierno crearan
for them to create clusters, productive
productivos, y
clusters, and
esos
that these clusters could
permitieran
allow
generar
the generation of new
innovaciones
innovations
dentro de
within
las
the
empresas
companies
que eran suplidas
that were,
por las universidades y se crearon
that in some cases, well,
varias
many
patentes
patents
que
were created
surgieron de
thanks
esa
to this
relación.
relation.
Pero
But
luego
later we
vemos
see
una
a
caída
drop in the
en los
next
años
years.
siguientes. Aquí lo que quiero
Here, what I
demostrar
want
también
to
es
show also,
importante
it's important to
cómo
see
se
how
desarrollan
we
políticas
create
públicas
public
para
policies to
articular
articulate
las empresas
the
con
companies
las
with the
universidades del
universities
país para poder
to
generar
generate
una mayor cantidad
more
de soluciones
solutions
y que sean
that can be
patentables.
sustainable.
En el caso de la
In the case of
sofisticación
business
empresarial,
sophistication,
vamos a ver acá
we will see
otro
another
elemento.
element here.
Siempre nosotros estamos con los
We
rankings
always
bien
have
altos,
high
o sea, muy
rankings.
cercanos a la posición promedio de 100. Solo Costa Rica está en el medio a nivel de los 123 países en la posición 50, pero quiero señalar unos
Some
elementos
elements that are
muy
very
importantes.
interesting.
Nuevamente
Again,
vemos
we
que
see that Costa
tiene
Rica has
un
a growth
crecimiento en el empleo intensivo
in the
en
intensive
conocimiento,
use of
aquí está la
knowledge
posición 69, en
ways.
el gasto bruto
And
en
in
investigación y
expense,
desarrollo está en la posición 62, los
and then the
países
other countries
más
are
rezagados,
behind.
incluso Nicaragua y República Dominicana no tienen datos
Dom Rep and
disponibles.
Nicaragua have no data available.
Está
And
también
also
la vinculación
the industry and the university for R&D. Costa Rica is in 62.
los otros
The other
países están
countries
más
are
rezagados en
behind.
el ranking 100. Y entradas netas de inversión extranjera
And foreign
directa
direct investment
está
is
la
in
posición
position
24.
24.
Acá quiero
Here I
ilustrar
want
también
to
un hecho que llama
show
la
you
atención.
something else that is
Nicaragua está
interesting.
mejor,
Nicaragua
está
is
en
doing
posición
better.
13,
It's at position
entradas netas de inversión
13.
extranjera directa. Pero pueden observar que a pesar de que Nicaragua está en una
Even though
posición mejor,
Nicaragua is
la colaboración
faring
universitaria
better,
es más
has a
baja.
lower rating. And it's
Y es porque
because
entra inversión, pero más para explotación de
there's
recursos.
investment for
Y en el
more
caso de
for
Costa Rica, entra
resources. And in the
inversión
case of
extranjera directa,
Costa
pero que
Rica, there's
dinamiza
FDI, but it
la
dynamizes the
generación de conocimiento y el
knowledge and
acercamiento
universities, and it's more sophisticated kind of
y
investment,
aumenta
and
el gasto de
there's more
investigación y
expenditures in
desarrollo.
R&D. So
Entonces
here
acá nos quedamos con otra idea
we
interesante
have
de
other
cómo
ideas of how to
avanzar
move forward
hacia
towards
crear
the creation
un mejor
of
ambiente
a
para aprovechar la propiedad
better
intelectual,
environment to use
es
these
el proceso
opportunities
de atraer
and
inversión
how to
extranjera
attract
directa,
direct foreign
atraer
investment,
empresas que están en la frontera, que
for
transfieren
them
el
to
know-how a los países
transfer the
y
know-how to these
obliga a
countries,
que
and
los
they
centros
make the university
universitarios estén
centers
más
to be more
vinculados
connected to
a estas
these
nuevas
new
empresas de
high
alta tecnología.
technologies.
Entonces, es bien
So
clave
it's
el tema de
it's
atraer
key to
inversión
attract
extranjera
foreign direct
directa,
investment,
fomentar la colaboración universidad-empresa, aumentar el
increase
gasto de investigación y
R&D,
desarrollo
and
y, como miramos en
as
la
we
plantilla
saw
anterior, promover
in the past slide,
exportaciones
promote exports of
de
high
alta
technology,
tecnología, más complejidad
more
de
complexity
exportación,
for exports,
exportaciones de alta tecnología y exportaciones de
and
servicios.
exports of
Entonces ahí vamos
services.
viendo
So
unos
there,
elementos que nos permite
we see
decir
some elements that will
que
allow
si
us
bien
to
en el
say
caso de
that
Centroamérica,
if
¿verdad?
and when the
Tenemos
case
un
of Central
problema de que
America,
los
we have
indicadores
some
de
issues,
creación de
the
conocimiento son
indicators are
bajos en
low
todos los países de
in
la
all
región,
the
¿verdad?
countries
Y
of the
estos están
region, and these are
vinculados
directly
a la
connected to
generación
the
de
investment of
patentes,
patents,
artículos científicos
technical,
técnicos y
scientific
documentos citables, ¿verdad?
articles, as
Como
we
vimos
saw
los
before.
diferentes indicadores, hay bajo la experiencia
Under
comparada
the
un
shared
proceso que nos
experience,
puede
there's a
permitir
process that
hacia
can
un
allow
camino para
us
aumentar
to
más
gather even
conocimiento,
more knowledge,
más productos, más
more patents.
patentes. Y
And
esto puede
this
ser a la luz
could
de
be
enfocarnos
if we
en
focus
atraer
on
inversiones
attracting
extranjeras de
and
mayor
higher
valor
value investments, foreign
que estas nos
direct
permitan
investment
exportar
that can
bienes y
allow us
servicios
to
más
export more
sofisticados
sophisticated goods,
y que
and that
esto
this is
posible
possible
siempre y
if and
cuando
when
haya
there
una
is
mayor
more
cooperación entre
cooperation between the
universidades y
universities and the
empresas
companies
para
to
resolver
solve
problemas en
problems in the
cadenas de
production
producción
chains
y
and to
generar
generate
productos
products
de
that
mayor
have a
valor
higher
que
value.
demandan los consumidores. Y esto
And
nos
this
lleva a
leads
que esto
us
es posible si sí nosotros
so that
tenemos
we
mayor
can have more
cobertura
coverage
y
and
calidad
quality
en la educación
education.
secundaria y terciaria. Entonces, esto
So
genera
this
un
creates a
ciclo
positive
positivo
cycle that
que nos lleva
leads us
hacia
to
mejorar
improving
nuestros
our
problemas de
problems
cómo
of how
crear
to
más
create more
patentes y
patents.
conocimientos. Entonces, esta es la presentación que
So that's the end of
tenía
my presentation
para
for
esta
this morning,
mañana y estaremos
and
muy
we will
atentos a
be
las
paying
preguntas e
attention
inquietudes que
to
tengan.
any Q&A
Muchas
that you
gracias
may
por
have, and thank you for
acompañarnos.
being with us.
Muchas
Thank you,
gracias,
Pedro,
Pedro.
and
También
also
gracias
thank you,
a
Patrick
Patrick Gilbright
and
y a
Danilo
Danilo Rodríguez
Rodriguez, for your
por sus
presentations.
presentaciones.
Thank you.
Gracias.